Preface to Book 2. To the Emperor Valetua. Such a continued series of victories and triumphs proved incontestably your Majesty's full and perfect knowledge of the military discipline of the ancients. Success in any profession is the most certain mark of skill in it. By a greatness of mind above human comprehension, your Majesty condescends to seek instruction from the ancients, notwithstanding your own recent exploits surpass antiquity itself. On receiving your Majesty's orders to continue this abridgment, not so much for your instruction as convenience, I knew not how to reconcile my devotion to your commands with the respect due to your Majesty. Would it not be the greatest height of presumption to pretend to mention the art of war to the Lord and Master of the world and the conqueror of all the barbarous nations, unless it were to describe his own actions? But disobedience to the will of so great a prince would be both highly criminal and dangerous. My obedience, therefore, made me presumptuous, from the apprehensions of appearing more so by a contrary conduct. And in this I was not a little encouraged by the late instance of your Majesty's indulgence. My treatise on the choice and discipline of new levies met with a favourable reception from your Majesty, and since a work succeeded so well, composed of my own accord, I can have no fears for one undertaken by your own express commands. Book 2, The Organization of the Legion. The Military Establishment. The military establishment consists of 3 parts, the cavalry, infantry and marine. The wings of cavalry were so called from their similitude to wings in their extension on both sides of the main body for its protection. They are now called vexillatios from the kind of standards peculiar to them. The legionary horse are bodies particularly annexed to each legion, and of a different kind, and on their model were organized the cavalry called auxiliaries, from the light boots they wear. The fleet consists of 2 divisions, the one of men of war called liberi, and the other of armed sloops. The cavalry are designed for plains. Fleets are employed for the protection of seas and rivers. The infantry are proper for the defense of eminences, for the garrisons of cities, and are equally serviceable in plain and in uneven ground. The latter, therefore, from their facility of acting everywhere, are certainly the most useful and necessary troops to a state exclusively of the consideration of their being maintained at a less expense. The infantry are divided into 2 corps, the legions and auxiliaries, the latter of which are furnished by allies or confederates. The peculiar strength of the Romans always consisted in the excellent organization of their legions. They were so denominated ab elegido, from the care and exactness used in the choice of the soldiers. The number of legionary troops in an army is generally much more considerable than that of the auxiliaries. Difference between the legions and auxiliaries. The Macedonians, the Greeks and the Dardanians formed their troops into phalanxes of 8,000 men each. The Gauls, Celtiberias and many other barbarous nations divided their armies into bodies of 6,000 each. The Romans have their legions usually 6,000 strong, sometimes more. We shall now explain the difference between the legions and the auxiliaries. The latter are hired corps of foreigners assembled from different parts of the empire, made up of different numbers, without knowledge of one another or any tie of affection. Each nation has its own peculiar discipline, customs and manner of fighting. Little can be expected from forces so dissimilar in every respect, since it is one of the most essential points in military undertakings that the whole army should be put in motion and governed by one and the same order. But it is almost impossible for men to act in concert under such varying and unsettled circumstances. They are, however, when properly trained and disciplined, of material service and are always joined as light troops with the legions in the line. and though the legions do not place their principal dependence on them, yet they look on them as a very considerable addition to their strength. But the complete Roman legion, in its own peculiar cohorts, contains within itself the heavy armed foot, that is, the principes, hastati, triarii, and atefagae, the light armed foot, consisting of the feritarii, archers, slingers, and ballistarii, together with the legionary cavalry incorporated with it. These bodies, all actuated with the same spirit, are united inseparably in their various dispositions for forming, encamping and fighting. Thus the legion is compact and perfect in all its parts and, without any foreign assistance, has always been superior to any force that could be brought against it. The Roman greatness is a proof of the excellence of their legions, for with them they always defeated whatever numbers of the enemy they thought fit, or their circumstances gave them an opportunity to engage. Causes of decay of the legion. The name of the legion remains indeed to this day in our armies, but its strength and substance are gone, since by the neglect of our predecessors, honors and preferments, which were formerly the recompenses of merit and long services, were to be attained only by interest and favor. Care is no longer taken to replace the soldiers, who after serving their full time, have received their discharges. The vacancies continually happening by sickness, discharges, desertion and various other casualties, if not supplied every year or even every month, must in time disable the most numerous army. Another cause of the weakness of our legions is that in them the soldiers find the duty hard, the arms heavy, the rewards distant and the discipline severe. To avoid these inconveniences, the young men enlist in the auxiliaries, where the service is less laborious and they have reason to expect more speedy recompenses. Cato the elder, who was often consul and always victorious at the head of the armies, believed he should do his country more essential service by writing on military affairs, than by all his exploits in the field. For the consequences of brave actions are only temporary, while whatever is committed to writing for public good is of lasting benefit. Several others have followed his example, particularly Photius, whose elaborate works on this subject were so well received by the Emperor Trajan. These are the authors whose maxims and institutions I have undertaken to abridge in the most faithful and carceral manner. The expense of keeping up good or bad troops is the same, but it depends wholly on you, most august Emperor, to recover the excellent discipline of the ancients and to correct the abuses of later times. This is a reformation the advantages of which will be equally felt by ourselves and our posterity. The organization of the legion. All our writers agree that never more than 2 legions, besides auxiliaries, were sent under the command of each consul against the most numerous armies of the enemies. Such was the dependence on their discipline and resolution that this number was thought sufficient for any war they were engaged in. I shall therefore explain the organization of the ancient legion according to the military constitution. But if the description appear obscure or imperfect, it is not to be imputed to me, but to the difficulty of the subject itself, which is therefore to be examined with the greater attention. A prince, skilled himself in military affairs, has it in his power to make himself invincible by keeping up whatever number of well-disciplined forces he thinks proper. The recruits having thus been carefully chosen with proper attention to their persons and dispositions, and having been daily exercised for the space of 4 months at least, the legion is formed by the command and under the auspices of the emperor. The military mark, which is indelible, is first imprinted on the hands of the new levies, and as their names are inserted in the roll of the legions they take the usual oath, called the military oath. They swear by God, by Christ and by the Holy Ghost, and by the majesty of the Emperor who, after God, should be the chief object of the love and veneration of mankind. for when he has once received the title of August, his subjects are bound to pay him the most sincere devotion and homage, as the representative of God on earth. And every man, whether in a private or military station, serves God in serving him faithfully who reigns by his authority. The soldiers, therefore, swear they will obey the emperor willingly and implicitly in all his commands, that they will never desert and will always be ready to sacrifice their lives for the Roman Empire. The legion should consist of 10 cohorts, the first of which exceeds the others both in number and quality of its soldiers, who are selected to serve in it as men of some family and education. This cohort has the care of the eagle, the chief ensign in the Roman armies and the standard of the whole legion, as well as of the images of the emperors which are always considered as sacred. It consists of 1105 foot and 132 horse cuirassiers, and is distinguished by the name of the militari cohort. It is the head of the legion and is always first formed on the right of the first line when the legion draws up in order of battle. The second cohort contains 555 foot and 66 horse, and is called the quadraria cohort. The third is composed of 555 foot and 66 horse, generally chosen men, on account of its situation in the center of the first line. The fourth consists of the same number of 555 foot and 66 horse. The fifth has likewise 555 foot and 66 horse, which should be some of the best men, being posted on the left flank as the first cohort is on the right. These 5 cohorts compose the first line. The sixth includes 555 foot and 66 horse, which should be the flower of the young soldiers as it draws up in the rear of the eagle and the images of the emperors, and on the right of the second line. The seventh contains 555 foot and 66 horse. The eighth is composed of 555 foot and 66 horse, all selected troops, as it occupies the center of the second line. The ninth has 555 foot and 66 horse. The 10th consists of the same number of 555 foot and 66 horse and requires good men, as it closes the left flank of the second line. These 10 cohorts form the complete legions, consisting in the whole of 6,100 foot and 726 horses. A legion should never be composed of a less number of men, but it is sometimes stronger by the addition of other militari cohorts. The officers of the legion. Having shown the ancient establishment of the legion, we shall now explain the names of the principal soldiers or, to use the proper term, the officers, and their ranks according to the present roles of the legions. The first tribune is appointed by the express commission and choice of the emperor. The second tribune rises to that rank by length of service. The tribunes are so called from their command over the soldiers, who were at first levied by Romulus out of the different tribes. The officers who in action commanded the orders or divisions are called auxiliarii. The Augustals were added by Augustus to the auxiliarii, and the Flavials were appointed by Flavius Vespasian to double the number of the Augustals. The eagle bearers and the image bearers are those who carry the eagles and images of the emperors. The options are subaltern officers, so denominated from their being selected by the option of their superior officers, to do their duty as their substitutes or lieutenants in case of sickness or other accident. The ensign bearers carry the ensigns and are called dracorii. The tessererii deliver the parole and the orders of the general to the different messes of the soldiers. The campigi or atefigi are those whose duty it is to keep the proper exercises and discipline among the troops. The metators are ordered before the army to fix on the ground for its encampments. The beefisherii are so named from their owing their promotion to the benefit or interest of the tribunes. The Librarii keep the legionary accounts. The Tubaces, Choraces, and Bucciatores derive their appellations from blowing the trumpet, cornet, and buccia. Those who, expert in their exercises, receive a double allowance of provisions, are called armaturi duplares, and those who have but a single portion, simples. The messeres mark out the ground by measure for the tents in an encampment, and assign the troops their respective quarters in garrison. The torquati, so denominated from the gold collars given them in reward for their bravery, had besides this honor different allowances. Those who received double were called torquati duplares, and those who had only single, simples. There were, for the same reason, cardadatii duplares, and cardadatii simples. These are the principal soldiers or officers distinguished by their rank and privileges thereto annexed. The rest are called munifics, or working soldiers, from their being obliged to every kind of military work without exception. Formerly it was the rule that the first princeps of the legion should be promoted regularly to the rank of centurion of the primapal. He not only was entrusted with the eagle but commanded 4 centuries, that is, 400 men in the first line. As head of the legion he had appointments of great honor and profit. The first Hastatus had the command of 2 centuries or 200 men in the second line, and is now called Ducarius. The princeps of the first cohort commanded 1.5 centuries, that is, 150 men, and kept in a great measure the general detail of the legion. The second Hastatus had likewise 1.5 centuries, or 150 men. The first Triarius had the command of 100 men. Thus the 10 centuries of the first cohort were commanded by 5 auxiliarii, who by the ancient establishment enjoyed great honors and emoluments that were annexed to this rank in order to inspire the soldiers of the legions with emulation to attain such ample and considerable rewards. They had also centurions appointed to each century, now called Setarii and Decay, who commanded 10 men, now called heads of messes. The second cohort had 5 centurions, and all the rest to the 10th inclusively the same number. In the whole legion there were 55. Lieutenants of consular dignity were formerly sent to command in the armies under the general, and their authority extended over both the legions and auxiliaries in peace and war. Instead of these officers, persons of high rank are now substituted with the title of masters of the forces. They are not limited to the command of 2 legions only, but have often a greater number. But the peculiar officer of the legion was the praefect, who was always a count of the first order. On him the chief command devolved in the absence of the lieutenant. The tribunes, centurions, and all the soldiers in general were under his orders. He gave out the parole and order for the march and for the guards. And if a soldier committed a crime, by his authority the tribune adjudged him to punishment. He had charge of the arms, horses, clothing and provisions. It was also his duty to keep both the legionary horse and foot in daily exercise and to maintain the strictest discipline. He ought to be a careful and diligent officer, as the sole charge of forming the legion to regularity and obedience depended on him, and the excellence of the soldiers redounded entirely to his own honor and credit. The praefect of the camp, though inferior in rank to the former, had a post of no small importance. The position of the camp, the direction of the entrenchments, the inspection of the tents or huts of the soldiers and the baggage were comprehended in his province. His authority extended over the sick, and the physicians who had the care of them, and he regulated the expenses relative thereto. He had the charge of providing carriages, bathhouses and the proper tools for sawing and cutting wood, digging trenches, raising parapets, sinking wells and bringing water into the camp. He likewise had the care of furnishing the troops with wood and straw, as well as the rams, agri, ballistae and all the other engines of war under his direction. This post was always conferred on an officer of great skill, experience and long service, and who consequently was capable of instructing others in those branches of the profession in which he had distinguished himself. The Prefect of the Workmen. The legion had a train of joiners, masons, carpenters, smiths, painters, and workmen of every kind for the construction of barracks in the winter camps and for making or repairing the wooden towers, arms, carriages and the various sorts of machines and engines for the attack or defense of places. They had also travelling workshops in which they made shields, cuirasses, helmets, bows, arrows, javelins and offensive and defensive arms of all kinds. The ancients made it their chief care to have everything for the service of the army within the camp. They even had a body of miners who, by working underground and piercing the foundations of walls, according to the practice of the Befi, penetrated into the body of a place. All these were under the direction of the officer called the Prefect of the Workmen. The Tribune of the Soldiers. We have observed that the legions had 10 cohorts, the first of which, called the militari cohort, was composed of men selected on account of their circumstances, birth, education, person and bravery. The tribune who commanded them was likewise distinguished for his skill in his exercises, for the advantages of his person and the integrity of his manners. The other cohorts were commanded, according to the emperor's pleasure, either by tribunes or other officers commissioned for that purpose. In former times the discipline was so strict that the tribunes or officers above Mishiode not only caused the troops under their command to be exercised daily in their presence, but were themselves so perfect in their military exercises as to set them the example. Nothing does so much honor to the abilities or application of the tribune as the appearance and discipline of the soldiers, when their apparel is neat and clean, their arms bright and in good order, and when they perform their exercises and evolutions with dexterity. Centuries and ensigns of the foot. The chief ensign of the whole legion is the eagle and is carried by the eagle bearer. Each cohort has also its own peculiar ensign, the dragon, carried by the Dracorius. The ancients, knowing the ranks were easily disordered in the confusion of action, divided the cohorts into centuries and gave each century an ensign inscribed with the number both of the cohort and century, so that the men keeping it in sight might be prevented from separating from their comrades in the greatest tumults. Besides, the centurions, now called Cetarii, were distinguished by different crests on their helmets, to be more easily known by the soldiers of their respective centuries. These precautions prevented any mistake, as every century was guided not only by its own ensign but likewise by the peculiar form of the helmet of its commanding officers. The centuries were also subdivided into messes of 10 men each, who lay in the same tent and were under orders and inspection of a decors or head of the mess. These messes were also called maniples from their constant custom of fighting together in the same company or division. Legionary troops of horse. As the divisions of the infantry are called centuries, so those of the cavalry are called troops. A troop consists of 32 men and is commanded by a decurio. Every century has its ensign and every troop its standard. The centurion in the infantry is chosen for his size, strength and dexterity in throwing his missile weapons and for his skill in the use of his sword and shield, in short for his expertness in all the exercises. He is to be vigilant, temperate, active and readier to execute the orders he receives than to talk, strict in exercising and keeping up proper discipline among his soldiers, in obliging them to appear clean and well dressed and to have their arms constantly rubbed and bright. In like manner the decurio is to be preferred to the command of a troop for his activity and address in mounting his horse completely armed, for his skill in riding and in the use of the lance and bow, for his atio in forming his men to all the evolutions of the cavalry, and for his care in obliging them to keep their cuirasses, lances and helmets always bright and in good order. The splendor of the arms has no inconsiderable effect in striking terror into an enemy. Can that man be reckoned a good soldier who through negligence suffers his arms to be spoiled by dirt and rust? In short, it is the duty of the decurio to be attentive to whatever concerns the health or discipline of the men or horses in his troop. Drawing up a legion in order of battle. We shall exemplify the manner of drawing up an army in order of battle in the instance of one legion, which may serve for any number. The cavalry are posted on the wings. The infantry begin to form on a line with the first cohort on the right. The second cohort draws up on the left of the first, the third occupies the center, the fourth is posted next, and the fifth closes the left flank. The auxiliaries, the other officers and the soldiers of the first line, ranged before and round the ensigns, were called the principes. They were all heavy-armed troops and had helmets, cuirasses, greaves, and shields. Their offensive weapons were large swords, called spathi, and smaller ones called semispathi, together with 5 loaded javelins in the concavity of the shield, which they threw at the first charge. They had likewise 2 other javelins, the largest of which was composed of a staff 5 feet and a half long and a triangular head of iron 9 inches long. This was formerly called the pilum, but now it is known by the name of spiculum. The soldiers were particularly exercised in the use of this weapon, because when thrown with force and skill it often penetrated the shields of the foot and the cuirasses of the horse. The other javelin was of smaller size, its triangular point was only 5 inches long and the staff 3 feet and 1/2. It was anciently called vericulum but now veritum. The first line, as I said before, was composed of the principes. The hastati formed the second and were armed in the same manner. In the second line the 6th cohort was posted on the right flank, with the 7th on its left, the 8th drew up in the center, the 9th was the next, and the 10th always closed the left flank. In the rear of these 2 lines were the militarii, light infantry and the troops armed with shields, loaded javelins, swords and common missile weapons, much in the same manner as our modern soldiers. This was also the post of the archers, who had helmets, cuirasses, swords, bows and arrows, of the slingers who threw stones with the common sling or with the fustibulus, and of the tragularii who annoyed the enemy with arrows from the morballisti or arcuballisti. In the rear of all the lines, the triarii, completely armed, were drawn up. They had shields, cuirasses, helmets, greaves, swords, daggers, loaded javelins, and 2 of the common missile weapons. They rested during the echo on one knee, so that if the first lines were obliged to give way, they might be fresh when brought up to the charge, and thereby retrieve what was lost and recover the victory. All the ensigns, though, of the infantry, wore cuirasses of a smaller sort and covered their helmets with the shaggy skins of beasts to make themselves appear more terrible to the enemy. But the centurions had complete cuirasses, shields, and helmets of iron, the crest of which, placed transversely thereon, were ornamented with silver that they might be more easily distinguished by their respective soldiers. The following disposition deserves the greatest attention. In the beginning of an engagement, the first and second lines remained immovable on their ground, and the triarii in their usual positions. The light-armed troops, composed as above mentioned, advanced in the front of the line, and attacked the enemy. If they could make them give way, they pursued them, but if they were repulsed by superior bravery or numbers, they retired behind their own heavy-armed infantry, which appeared like a wall of iron, and renewed the action, at first with their missile weapons, then sword in hand. If they broke the enemy they never pursued them, lest they should break their ranks or throw the line into confusion, and lest the enemy, taking advantage of their disorder, should return to the attack and destroy them without difficulty. The pursuit therefore was entirely left to the light-armed troops and the cavalry. By these precautions and dispositions the legion was victorious without danger, or if the contrary happened, was preserved without any considerable loss, for as it is not calculated for pursuit, it is likewise not easily thrown into disorder. Names of soldiers inscribed on their shields. Lest the soldiers in the confusion of battle should be separated from their comrades, every cohort had its shields painted in a manner peculiar to itself. The name of each soldier was also written on his shield, together with the number of the cohort and century to which he belonged. From this description we may compare the legion, when in proper order, to a well-fortified city as containing within itself everything requisite in war, wherever it moved. It was secure from any sudden attempt or surprise of an enemy by its expeditious method of entrenching its camp even in the open plains, and it was always provided with troops and arms of every kind. To be victorious, therefore, over our enemies in the field, we must unanimously supplicate heaven to dispose the emperor to reform the abuses in raising our levies and to recruit our legions after the method of the ancients. The same care in choosing and instructing our young soldiers in all military exercises and drills will soon make them equal to the old Roman troops who subdued the whole world. Nor let this alteration and loss of ancient discipline in any way affect your Majesty, since it is a happiness reserved for you alone both to restore the ancient ordinances and establish new ones for the public welfare. Every work before the attempt carries in it an appearance of difficulty, but in this case, if the levies are made by careful and experienced officers, an army may be raised, disciplined and rendered fit for service in a very short time, for the necessary expenses once provided. Diligence soon effects whatever it undertakes. Records and accounts. Several posts in the legion requiring men of some education, the superintendents of the levies should select some recruits for their skill in writing and accounts, besides the qualification to be attended to in general, such as size, strength and proper disposition for the service. For the whole detail of the legion, including the lists of the soldiers exempted from duty on private accounts, the rosters for their tour of military duties and their pay lists, is daily entered in the legionary books and kept, we may almost say, with greater exactness than the regulations of provisions or other civil matters in the registers of the police. The daily guards in time of peace, the advanced guards and outposts in time of war, which are mounted regularly by the centuries and messes in their turns, are likewise punctually kept in rolls for that purpose, with the name of each soldier whose tour is past, that no one may have injustice done him or be excused from his duty by favor. They are also exact in entering the time and limitation of furloughs, which formerly were never granted without difficulty and only on real and urgent business. They then never suffered the soldiers to attend on any private person or to concern themselves in private occupations, thinking it absurd and improper that the emperor's soldiers, clothed and subsisted at the public expense, should follow any other profession. Some soldiers, however, were allowed for the service of the praefects, tribunes and even of the other officers, hour of the number of the exerci or such as were raised after the legion was complete. These latter are now called supernumeraries. The regular troops were obliged to carry their wood, hay, water and straw into the camp themselves. From such kind of services they were called munifics. Soldiers' deposits. The institution of the ancients which obliged the soldiers to deposit half of every donative they received at the colours was wise and judicious. The intent was to preserve it for their use so that they might not squander it in extravagance or idle expense. For most men, particularly the poorer sort, soon spend whatever they can get. A reserve of this kind therefore is evidently of the greatest service to the soldiers themselves, since they are maintained at the public expense. Their military stock by this method is continually increasing. The soldier who knows all his fortune is deposited at his colours, entertains no thoughts of desertion, conceives a greater affection for them and fights with greater intrepidity in their defence. He is also prompted thereto by interest, the most prevailing consideration among men. This money was contained in 10 bags, one for each cohort. There was an 11th bag also for a small contribution from the whole legion, as a common fund to defray the expense of burial of any of their deceased comrades. These collections were kept in baskets in the custody of the ensigns, chosen for their integrity and capacity, and answerable for the trust and obliged to account with every man for his own proportion. Promotion in the legion. Heaven certainly inspired the Romans with the organization of the legion, so superior does it seem to human invention. Such is the arrangement and disposition of the 10 cohorts that compose it, as to appear one perfect body and form one complete whole. A soldier, as he advances in rank, proceeds as it were by rotation through the different degrees of the several cohorts in such a manner that one who is promoted passes from the first cohort to the 10th, and returns again regularly through all the others with a continual increase of rank and pay to the first. Thus the centurion of the Primapal, after having commanded in the different ranks of every cohort, attains that great dignity in the first with infinite advantages from the whole legion. The chief prefect of the Praetorian Guards rises by the same method of rotation to that lucrative and honorable rank. Thus the legionary horse contract an affection for the foot of their own cohorts, notwithstanding the natural antipathy existing between the two corps. And this connection establishes a reciprocal attachment and union between all the cohorts and the cavalry and infantry of the legion. Legionary music. The music of the legion consists of trumpets, cornets and buccieri. The trumpet sounds the charge and the retreat. The cornets are used only to regulate the motions of the colors. The trumpets serve when the soldiers are ordered out to any work without the colors, but in time of action, the trumpets and cornets sound together. The classicum, which is a particular sound of the buccier or horn, is appropriated to the commander-in-chief and is used in the presence of the general, or at the execution of a soldier, as a mark of its being done by his authority. The ordinary guards and outposts are always mounted and relieved by the sound of trumpet, which also directs the motions of the soldiers on working parties and on field days. The cornets sound whenever the colors are to be struck or planted. These rules must be punctually observed in all exercises and reviews so that the soldiers may be ready to obey them in action without hesitation according to the general's orders either to charge or halt, to pursue the enemy or to retire. For reason will convince us that what is necessary to be performed in the heat of action should constantly be practiced in the leisure of peace. The drilling of the troops. The organization of the legion being thus explained, let us return to the drills. The younger soldiers and recruits went through their drills of every kind every morning and afternoon, and the veterans and most expert regularly once a day. Length of service or age alone will never form a military man, for after serving many years an undisciplined soldier is still a novice in his profession. Not only those under the masters at arms, but all the soldiers in general, were formerly trained incessantly in those drills which now are only exhibited as shows in the circus for particular solemnities. By practice only can be acquired agility of body and the skill requisite to engage an enemy with advantage, especially in close fight. But the most essential point of all is to teach soldiers to keep their ranks and never abandon their colors in the most difficult evolutions. Men thus trained are never at a loss amidst the greatest confusion of numbers. The recruits likewise are to be exercised with wooden swords at the post, to be taught to attack this imaginary antagonist on all sides and to aim at the sides, feet or head, both with the point and edge of the sword. They must be instructed how to spring forward to give the blow, to rise with a bound above the shield and then to sink down and shelter themselves under cover of it, and how to advance and retire. They must also throw their javelins at the post from a considerable distance in order to acquire a good aim and strengthen the arm. The archers and slingers set up bundles of twigs or straw for marks, and generally strike them with arrows and with stones from the fastibulus at the distance of 600 feet. They acquired coolness and exactness in echo from familiar custom and exercise in the field. The slingers should be taught to whirl the sling but once about the head before they cast the stone. Formerly all soldiers were trained to the praxis of throwing stones of a pound weight with the hand, as this was thought a readier method since it did not require a sling. The use of the common missile weapons and loaded javelins was another part of the drill strictly attended to. To continue this drill without interruption during the winter, they erected for the cavalry porticos or riding halls covered with tiles or shingles, and if they were not to be procured, with reeds, rushes or thatch. Large open halls were likewise constructed in the same manner for the use of the infantry. By these means the troops were provided with places of drill sheltered from bad weather. But even in winter, if it did not rain or snow, they were obliged to perform their drills in the field, lest an intermission of discipline should affect both the courage and constitution of the soldier. In short, both legionary and auxiliary troops should continually be drilled in cutting wood, carrying burdens, passing ditches, swimming in the sea or in rivers, marching in the full step and even running with their arms and baggage, so that, inured to labor in peace, they may find no difficulty in war. For, as the well-trained soldier is eager for action, so does the untaught fear it. In war discipline is superior to strength, but if that discipline is neglected, there is no longer any difference between the soldier and the peasant. The old maxim is certain that the very essence of an art consists in constant practice. Machines and tools of the legion. The legion owes its success to its arms and machines, as well as to the number and bravery of its soldiers. In the first place, every century has a ballista mounted on a carriage drawn by mules and served by a mess, that is by 10 men from the century to which it belongs. The larger these engines are, the greater distance they carry and with the greater force. They are used not only to defend the entrenchments of camps, but are also placed in the field in the rear of the heavy armed infantry. And such is the violence with which they throw the darts that neither the cuirasses of the horse nor shields of the foot can resist them. The number of these engines in a legion is 55. Besides these are 10 auxiliaries, 1 for each cohort. They are drawn ready armed on carriages by oxen. In case of an attack, they defend the works of the camp by throwing stones as the ballistae do darts. The legion carries with it a number of small boats, each hollowed out of a single piece of timber, with long cables and sometimes iron chains to fasten them together. These boats, joined and covered with planks, serve as bridges over unfordable rivers, on which both cavalry and infantry pass without danger. The legion is provided with iron hooks, called wolves, and iron scythes fixed to the ends of long poles, and with forks, spades, shovels, pickaxes, wheelbarrows and baskets for digging and transporting earth, together with hatchets, axes and saws for cutting wood. Besides which, a train of workmen attend on it furnished with all instruments necessary for the construction of tortoises, musculi, rams, vines, moving towers and other machines for the attack of places. As the enumeration of all the particulars of this sort would be too tedious, I shall only observe that the legion should carry with it wherever it moves, whatever is necessary for every kind of service, so that the encampments may have all the strength and conveniences of a fortified city.